The Dreamer and the Dreamed. I drove to Don Juan's house and arrived there in the early morning. I had spent the night in a motel on the way down so I would get to his house before noon. Don Juan was in the back and came to the front when I called him. He gave me a warm greeting and the impression that he was pleased to see me. He made a comment that I thought was intended to put me at ease, but produced the opposite effect. "I heard you coming," he said as he grinned, and I ran to the back. I was afraid that if I had stayed here, you would have been frightened. He casually remarked that I was somber and heavy. He said that I reminded him of Eligio, who was morbid enough to be a good sorcerer, but too morbid to become a man of knowledge. He added that the only way to counteract the devastating effect of the sorcerer's world was to laugh at it. He was right in his assessment of my mood. I was indeed worried and frightened. We went for a long walk. It took hours for my feelings to ease up. Walking with him made me feel better than if he had attempted to talk me out of my somberness. We returned to his house in the late afternoon. I was famished. After eating, we sat under the ramada. The sky was clear. The afternoon light made me feel complacent. I wanted to talk. "I felt uneasy for months," I said. "There was something truly awesome in what you and Don Genaro said and did the last time I was here." Don Juan did not say anything. He got up and moved around the ramada. "I've got to talk about this," I said. "It obsesses me, and I can't stop pondering upon it." "Are you afraid?" he asked. I was not afraid, but baffled, overwhelmed by what I had heard and witnessed. The loopholes in my reason were so gigantic that either I had to repair them or I had to dispose of my reason altogether. My comments made him laugh. "Don't throw away your reason yet," he said. "It's not time for it. It'll happen though, but I don't think that now is the moment." "Should I try to find an explanation for what happened then?" I asked. "Certainly," he retorted. "It's your duty to put your mind at ease. Warriors do not win victories by beating their heads against walls, but by overtaking the walls. Warriors jump over the walls. They don't demolish them." "How can I jump over this one?" I asked. "First of all, I think it's deadly wrong for you to regard anything in such a serious fashion," he said as he sat down by my side. "There are 3 kinds of bad habits which we use over and over when confronted with unusual life situations. First, we may disregard what's happening or has happened and feel as if it had never occurred. That one is the bigot's way. Second, we may accept everything at its face value and feel as if we know what's going on. That's the pious man's way. Third, we may become obsessed with an event because either we cannot disregard it or we cannot accept it wholeheartedly. That's the fool's way, your way. There is a fourth, the correct one, the warrior's way. A warrior acts as if nothing had ever happened because he doesn't believe in anything, yet he accepts everything at its face value. He accepts without accepting and disregards without disregarding. He never feels as if he knows, neither does he feel as if nothing had ever happened. He acts as if he is in control, even though he might be shaking in his boots. To act in such a manner dissipates obsession. We were quiet for a long time. Don Juan's words were like a balm to me. Can I talk about Don Genaro and his double? I asked. It depends on what you want to say about him, he replied. Are you going to indulge in being obsessed? I want to indulge in explanations, I said. I'm obsessed because I haven't dared come to see you, and I haven't been able to talk about my qualms and doubts with anyone. Don't you talk with your friends? I do, but how could they help me? I never thought that you needed help. You must cultivate the feeling that a warrior needs nothing. You say you need help. Help for what? You have everything needed for the extravagant journey that is your life. I have tried to teach you that the real experience is to be a man, and that what counts is being alive. Life is the little detour that we are taking now. Life in itself is sufficient, self-explanatory, and complete. A warrior understands this and lives accordingly. Therefore, one may say without being presumptuous that the experience of experiences is being a warrior. He seemed to wait for me to say something. I hesitated for a moment. I wanted to select my words carefully. If a warrior needs solace, he went on, he simply chooses anyone and expresses to that person every detail of his turmoil. After all, the warrior is not seeking to be understood or helped. By talking, he's merely relieving himself of his pressure. That is, providing that the warrior is given to talking. If he's not, he tells no one. But you're not living like a warrior altogether. Not yet, anyway. And the pitfalls that you encounter must be truly monumental. You have all my sympathy. He was not being facetious. Judging by the concern in his eyes, he seemed to be one who had been there himself. He stood up and patted me on the head. He walked back and forth the length of the ramada and looked casually to the chaparral around the house. His movements evoked a sensation of restlessness in me. In order to relax, I began to talk about my dilemma. I felt that it was inherently too late for me to pretend to be an innocent bystander. Under his guidance, I had trained myself to achieve strange perceptions, such as stopping the internal dialogue and controlling my dreams. Those were instances that could not be faked. I had followed his suggestions, although never to the letter, and had partially succeeded in disrupting daily routines, assuming responsibility for my acts, erasing personal history, and had finally arrived at a point which years before I had dreaded. I was capable of being alone without disrupting my physical or emotional well-being. That was perhaps my single most astounding triumph. From the point of view of my former expectations and moods, to be alone and not to go out of my mind was an inconceivable state. I was keenly aware of all the changes that had taken place in my life and in my view of the world. And I was also aware that it was somehow superfluous to be affected so profoundly by Don Juan and Don Genaro's revelation about the double. "What's wrong with me, Don Juan?" I asked. "You indulge," he snapped. "You feel that indulging in doubts and tribulations is the sign of a sensitive man. Well, the truth of the matter is that you're the farthest thing from being sensitive, so why pretend? I told you the other day, a warrior accepts in humbleness what he is." You make it sound as if I were confusing myself deliberately, I said. We do confuse ourselves deliberately, he said. All of us are aware of our doings. Our puny reason deliberately makes itself into the monster it fancies itself to be. It's too little for such a big mold, though. I explained to him that my dilemma was perhaps more complex than what he was making it out to be. I said that as long as he and Don Genaro were men like myself, their superior control made them models for my own behavior. But if they were in essence men drastically different than I, then I could not conceive of them any longer as models, but as oddities, which I could not possibly aspire to emulate. Genaro is a man, Don Juan said in a reassuring tone. He's no longer a man like yourself, true, but that's his accomplishment, and it shouldn't give rise to fear on your part. If he's different, the more reason to admire him. But his difference is not a human difference, I said. And what do you think it is? The difference between a man and a horse? I don't know, but he's not like me. He was at one time, though. But can his change be understood by me? Of course. You yourself are changing. Do you mean that I will develop a double? No one develops a double. That's only a way of talking about it. You, for all the talking you do, are a sap for words. You get trapped by their meanings. Now you think that one develops a double through evil means, I suppose. All of us luminous beings have a double. All of us. A warrior learns to be aware of it, that's all. There are seemingly insurmountable barriers protecting that awareness. But that's expected. Those barriers are what makes arriving at that awareness such a unique challenge. Why am I so afraid of it, Don Juan? Because you're thinking that the double is what the word says, a double, or another you. I chose those words in order to describe it. The double is oneself and cannot be faced in any other way. What if I don't want to have it? The double is not a matter of personal choice. Neither is it a matter of personal choice who is selected to learn the sorcerer's knowledge that leads to that awareness. Have you ever asked yourself why you in particular? All the time. I've asked you that question hundreds of times, but you've never answered it. I didn't mean that you should ask it as a question that begs an answer, but in the sense of a warrior's pondering on his great fortune, the fortune of having found a challenge. To make it into an ordinary question is the device of a conceited ordinary man who wants to be either admired or pitied for it. I have no interest in that kind of question, because there is no way of answering it. The decision of picking you was a design of power. No one can discern the designs of power. Now that you've been selected, there is nothing that you can do to stop the fulfillment of that design. But you yourself told me, Don Juan, that one can always fail. That's true. One can always fail. But I think that you are referring to something else. You want to find a way out. You want to have the freedom to fail and quit on your own terms. Too late for that. A warrior is in the hands of power, and his only freedom is to choose an impeccable life. There is no way to fake triumph or defeat. Your reason may want you to fail altogether in order to obliterate the totality of yourself. But there is a countermeasure which will not permit you to declare a false victory or defeat. If you think that you can retreat to the haven of failure, you're out of your mind. Your body will stand guard and will not let you go either way. He began to chuckle softly. "Why do you laugh?" I asked. "You're in a terrible spot," he said. "It's too late for you to retreat, but too soon to act. All you can do is witness. You're in the miserable position of an infant who cannot return to the mother's womb, but neither can he run around and act. All an infant can do is witness and listen to the stupendous tales of action being told to him. You are at that precise point now. You cannot go back to the womb of your old world, but you cannot act with power either. For you, there is only witnessing acts of power and listening to tales of power. The double is one of those tales. You know that. And that's why your reason is so taken by it. You are beating your head against the wall if you pretend to understand. All that I can say about it, by the way of explanation, is that the double, although it is arrived at through dreaming, is as real as it can be. According to what you've told me, Don Juan, the double can perform acts. Can the double then? He did not let me continue with my line of reasoning. He reminded me that it was inappropriate to say that he had told me about the double when I could say that I had witnessed it. Obviously, the double can perform acts, I said. Obviously, he replied. But can the double act in behalf of the self? It is the self, damn it. I found it very difficult to explain myself. I had in mind that if a sorcerer could perform two actions at once, his capacity for utilitarian production had to double. He could work two jobs, be in two places, see two persons, and so on, at once. Don Juan listened patiently. "Let me put it this way," I said. "Hypothetically, can Don Genaro kill someone hundreds of miles away by letting his double do it?" Don Juan looked at me. He shook his head and moved his eyes away. "You're filled with tales of violence," he said. "Genaro cannot kill anyone simply because he no longer has any interest in his fellow men. By the time a warrior is capable of conquering seeing and dreaming and having the awareness of his luminosity, there is no such interest left in him. I pointed out that at the beginning of my apprenticeship, he had made the statement that a sorcerer, aided by his ally, could be transported over hundreds of miles to deliver a blow to his enemies. "I am responsible for your confusion," he said. "But you must remember that on another occasion I told you that, with you, I was not following the steps my own teacher prescribed. He was a sorcerer, and I should have properly plunged you into that world. I didn't, because I am no longer concerned with the ups and downs of my fellow men. Yet, my teacher's words stuck with me. I talked to you many times in the manner he himself would have talked. Genaro is a man of knowledge, the purest of them all. His actions are impeccable. He's beyond ordinary men and beyond sorcerers. His double is an expression of his joy and his humor. Thus, he cannot possibly use it to create or resolve ordinary situations. As far as I know, the double is the awareness of our state as luminous beings. It can do anything, and yet it chooses to be unobtrusive and gentle. It was my error to mislead you with borrowed words. My teacher was not capable of producing the effects Genaro does. For my teacher, unfortunately, certain things were, as they are for you, only tales of power. I was compelled to defend my point. I said that I was speaking in a hypothetical sense. There is no hypothetical sense when you speak about the world of men of knowledge, he said. A man of knowledge cannot possibly act towards his fellow men in injurious terms, hypothetically or otherwise. But what if his fellow men are plotting against his security and well-being? Can he then use his double to protect himself? He clicked his tongue in disapproval. What incredible violence in your thoughts, he said. No one can plot against the security and well-being of a man of knowledge. He sees, therefore he would take steps to avoid anything like that. Genaro, for example, has taken a calculated risk in joining you. But there is nothing that you could do to endanger his security. If there is anything, his seeing will let him know. Now, if there is something about you that is inherently injurious to him, and his seeing cannot reach it, then it is his fate, and neither Genaro nor anyone else can avoid that. So, you see, a man of knowledge is in control without controlling anything. We were quiet. The sun was about to reach the top of the heavy tall bushes on the west side of the house. There were about 2 hours of daylight left. "Why don't you call Genaro?" Don Juan said casually. My body jumped. My initial reaction was to drop everything and run for my car. Don Juan broke into a belly laugh. I told him that I did not have to prove anything to myself, and that I was perfectly content to talk to him. Don Juan could not stop laughing. Finally, he said that it was a shame that Don Genaro was not there to enjoy a great scene. "Look, if you're not interested in calling Genaro, I am," he said in a resolute tone. "I like his company." I had a terrible sour taste on the roof of my mouth. Beads of perspiration ran down from my brow and my upper lip. I wanted to say something, but there was really nothing to say. Don Juan gave me a long, scrutinizing look. "Come on," he said. "A warrior is always ready." To be a warrior is not a simple matter of wishing to be one. It is rather an endless struggle that will go on to the very last moment of our lives. Nobody is born a warrior, in exactly the same way that nobody is born a reasonable being. We make ourselves into one or the other. Pull yourself together. I don't want Genaro to see you shivering like this. He stood up and paced back and forth on the clean floor of the ramada. I could not remain impassive. My nervousness was so intense that I could not write any more, and I jumped to my feet. Don Juan made me jog on the spot, facing the west. He had made me perform the same movements before on various occasions. The idea was to draw power from the impending twilight by raising one's arms to the sky with the fingers stretched like a fan, and then clasp them forcefully when the arms were in the midpoint between the horizon and the zenith. The exercise worked, and I became almost instantly calm and collected. I could not avoid wondering, however, what had happened to the old me that could never have relaxed so completely by performing those simple and idiotic movements. I wanted to focus all my attention on the procedure that Don Juan was doubtlessly going to follow to call Don Genaro. I anticipated some portentous acts. Don Juan stood on the edge of the ramada, facing the southeast, cupping his hands around his mouth, and yelled, "Genaro, come here." A moment later, Don Genaro emerged from the chaparral. Both of them were beaming. They practically danced in front of me. Don Genaro greeted me effusively and then sat down on the milk crate. There was something dreadfully wrong with me. I was calm, unruffled. Some incredible state of indifference and aloofness had taken over my entire being. It was almost as if I were watching myself from a hiding place. In a very nonchalant manner, I proceeded to tell Don Genaro that during my last visit, he had nearly scared me to death, and that not even during my experience with psychotropic plants had I been in such a complete state of chaos. Both of them celebrated my statements as if they were meant to be funny. I laughed with them. They obviously were aware of my state of emotional numbness. They watched me and humored me as if I were drunk. There was something inside me that fought desperately to turn the situation into something familiar. I wanted to be concerned and afraid. Don Juan finally splashed some water on my face and urged me to sit down and take notes. He said, as he had done before, that either I took notes or I died. The mere act of putting down some words brought back my familiar mood. It was as if something became crystal clear again, something that a moment before had been opaque and numb. The advent of my usual self also meant the advent of my usual fears. Strangely enough, I was less afraid of being afraid than of being unafraid. The familiarity of my old habits, no matter how unpleasant they were, was a delightful respite. I fully realized then that Don Genaro had just emerged from the chaparral. My usual processes were beginning to function. I started by refusing to think or speculate about the event. I made the resolution of not asking him anything. I was going to be a silent witness this time. "Genaro has come again, exclusively for you," Don Juan said. Don Genaro was leaning against the wall of the house, resting his back against it while he sat on a tilted milk crate. He looked as if he were riding on horseback. His hands were in front of him, giving the impression that he was holding the reins of a horse. "That's right, Carlitos," he said, and brought the milk crate to rest on the ground. He dismounted, whirling his right leg over an imaginary neck of a horse, and then jumped to the ground. His movements were so perfectly executed that he gave me the unquestionable sensation that he had arrived on horseback. He came to my side and sat down to my left. "Genaro has come because he wants to tell you about the other," Don Juan said. He made a gesture of giving Don Genaro the floor. Don Genaro bowed. He turned slightly to face me. "What would you like to know, Carlitos?" he asked in a high-pitched voice. "Well, if you're going to tell me about the double, tell me everything," I said, feigning casualness. Both of them shook their heads and glanced at each other. Genaro is going to tell you about the dreamer and the dreamed, Don Juan said. As you know, Carlitos, Don Genaro said with the air of an orator warming up, the double begins in dreaming. He gave me a long look and smiled. His eyes swept from my face to my notebook and pencil. The double is a dream, he said, scratched his arms, and then stood up. He walked to the edge of the ramada and stepped out into the chaparral. He stood by a bush, showing 3/4 of his profile to us. He was apparently urinating. After a moment, I noticed that there seemed to be something wrong with him. He appeared to be trying desperately to urinate, but could not. Don Juan's laughter was the clue that Don Genaro was clowning again. Don Genaro contorted his body in such a comical fashion that he had had Don Juan and me practically in hysterics. Don Genaro came back to the ramada and sat down. His smile radiated a rare warmth. "When you can't, you just can't," he said, and shrugged his shoulders. Then, after a moment's pause, he added, sighing, "Yes, Carlitos, the double is a dream." "Do you mean that he's not real?" I asked. "No, I mean that he is a dream," he retorted. Don Juan intervened and explained that Don Genaro was referring to the first emergence of the awareness that we are luminous beings.